Hello, welcome to Learning with the Cleveland Orchestra. My name is Rose Breckenridge and I'm lecturing today for the Cleveland Orchestra series Music in Depth. Today we're looking at Bela Bartok and his Divertimento for String Orchestra. I'll be talking about Bela Bartok's life and his musical style, and I'll give you background for Divertimento for String Orchestra, plus a musical tour of the piece. Well, let's get started. Bela Bartok was born in 1881 and died in 1945. He was a Hungarian pianist and composer, one of the greatest composers of the 20th century, but difficulties challenged and plagued him throughout his life. His father was director of an agricultural college, and he died when Bartok was just 7. And his mother was forced to move all around the country. Of course, Hungary at that point was still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as she sought employment as a teacher so she could support her family, herself, her son, and his sister. So at a young age, Bartok experienced many types of Hungarian locales and Hungarian folk music, and he grew to have a very deep love for his country's rich musical heritage. He was quite talented in music, and when he was just 18, he qualified to enter the Budapest Academy of Music to study piano and composition. It was there that he met Zoltán Kodály, who became his lifelong friend. Together, they began to study Hungarian folk music in the field, recording it with newfangled recording equipment for the beginning of the 20th century. So in a sense, they became the first modern ethnomusicologists. Bartok was very shy and modest and a quite introverted man. When he was appointed professor of piano and composition at the Budapest Academy in 1907, he was quite content to lead a quiet life devoted to teaching, folk music, research, and composing. When he was in his 30s, Bartok composed 3 important stage works, the one-act opera Bluebeard's Castle, a ballet, The Wooden Prince, and the pantomime, The Miraculous Mandarin. He found, however, though, that bringing them to performance would be quite challenging. All of those stage works have a common theme. They explore men of nobility. Bartok's father was actually of Hungarian nobility. And they had severe difficulties in their relationships with women. You might be interested to know that the Cleveland Orchestra performed a fully staged double bill production in April of 2016 that included both Bartok's opera Bluebeard's Castle and his pantomime The Miraculous Mandarin. So as he entered into his 40s in the 1920s, he retreated from stage works and focused more on purely musical compositions like writing piano and violin concertos, string quartets, and he was very interested in education, and he composed many small piano pieces for teaching children to play the piano, Mikrokosmos. He kept up his piano performing skills, and in 1927 he was invited to travel to New York to perform as a soloist with the New York Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall in his recently written first piano concerto. However, there were so many difficulties in rehearsal, they didn't have time to get it ready for performance, and so they had to substitute an earlier work he had written, Rhapsody for Piano and Orchestra. Now, in the 1930s, after Hitler rose to power, Bartok was quite dismayed as his beloved country drew closer and closer to the Nazis. He was fiercely opposed to this development. He stopped performing in Nazi Germany. He stopped lecturing in Nazi Germany. He quietly began to send his scores out of the country. And he also went to Switzerland to arrange to have Boosey and Hawkes become his new publisher. So these actions, however, aroused suspicion, and his friends began to fear for Bartók's safety. They urged him to leave Budapest, but he would not abandon his age's mother, who lived there. Only after she died in December of 1939 did he begin to make plans to leave his beloved Hungary. In 1940, Columbia University in New York invited him to come there to do folk music research. So Bartók finally left Hungary with his wife Dita and their son Peter in October of 1940. None too soon, because the very next month, in November of 1940, Hungary joined the Axis powers. Once in the United States, however, Bartók continued to experience difficulties. His fellowship at Columbia ran out in 1942. He continued to try to support himself with concertizing, but his health and his finances were failing. He was very fortunate that Koussevitzky brought him some commissions during that time when he was struggling with illness. And now some of the works he composed are known as his greatest masterpieces, most notably his Concerto for Orchestra. But his diagnosis, which was leukemia, eventually led to his death in New York Hospital in September of 1945. With sadness, he said to his doctor, "The trouble is, I have to go with still so much to say." So now let's look at his music and his style. Bartók is quite unique. He has a wonderful 20th century modern synthesis of both the old and the new. He loved neoclassicism. He was very devoted to composing works that had clear structure, and it's often said that you can find the golden mean in them, namely proportions of duration that coincide with the Greeks' belief that there was a perfect proportions for beauty. He also looked to the Baroque period. He loved counterpoint. He especially liked to write fugues. We're going to meet a few in his Divertimento for strings. In terms of what was going on in the late 19th and early 20th century, was quite fascinated by Debussy and his new use of orchestral color and new uses of harmony, non-functional harmony, and whole tone scales. And he allowed that to influence his composition. Yet, on the other hand, he was quite interested in the music of Stravinsky. He loved Stravinsky's vibrant rhythms and those dissonant percussive chords. But most of all, as I mentioned earlier, his study of Hungarian folk music was the most profound influence on his musical style. So how did the Divertimento for String Orchestra come to be? We need to talk about Paul Sacher, who was a very important arts patron and also the founder and conductor of the Basel Chamber Orchestra in Switzerland. And he got to know Bartók and his music, and he loved Bartók's music. And he actually commissioned Bartók 3 times in the 1930s, in 1936, 37, and then for this piece in 1939. All of these works turned out to be great masterpieces of the 20th century. Particularly notable was the 1936 commission, namely Music for String, Percussion, and Celesta. And because of the success of those previous 2 commissions, Sacher asked Bartók to write a work in 1939 scored for string orchestra. Now, times were very troubled in Europe in 1939, and Sacher knew that Bartók was quite disturbed and perturbed about the Nazis and what was going on. So he arranged for Bartók to come to Switzerland and stay in a little chalet in the Alps in order to provide the composer a quiet place to work amidst those troubled times of 1939. Astonishingly, Bartók actually completed this 25-minute work, three-movement, 25-minute work, Divertimento for strings, in just a few weeks during August of 1939. And Sacher gave the premiere the following June in Switzerland there, 1940. Unfortunately, because of developments in Bartók's life, he was not able to attend that premiere. So the Divertimento for String Orchestra reflects all of those style characteristics that we talked about. For example, Bartók's neoclassical interest in musical models from the past. The very title, Divertimento, it means in Italian, entertainment. It's a light entertainment, supposedly, piece. It was a favorite genre of 18th century composers. Plus, in this work, Bartók employs Baroque techniques. I already mentioned his interest in counterpoint and fugues, but he also grabbed on to the Baroque idea of alternating a large group tutti, or ripieno as they called it in the Baroque period, with a small group of soloists called concertino in the manner of a Baroque concerto grosso. But don't forget his Hungarian folk songs. This work also reflects his interest and study of Hungarian folk songs and dances with their very non-traditional scales that are kind of modal, different from our major minor scales that we're used to, and oftentimes irregular rhythms. But there's also that context of the 1939 troubles in Europe. And Bartók was a very emotional man, and that historical context finds its way into the music as Bartók struggles with the rising threat of the Nazi regime. We'll see that when we do our musical tour. The composition's actually in three movements: fast, slow, fast, but it's more than just a simple alternation of tempos. Fast, slow, fast, sort of like different pictures from different countries you went to. No. What Bartók does is he knits the work together so that there's a, if you will, progressive form with a dramatic arc that extends from one movement to the next to the next. Again, we'll see that when we do our little musical tour. And the whole idea of the lighter divertimento style, which starts out the opening movement being sort of afflicted, if you will, with a darker idea, creates a struggle in that first movement. And that struggle spills over into the slow movement and actually intensifies. But hope and light do break out in the cheerful finale, which features wonderful Hungarian folk dance music. So let's look at the music itself and hear a few examples. The first movement is entitled Allegro non troppo, fast but not too fast, and it opens with a lively, very graceful melody that's sung by the large tutti group. It's kind of a Hungarian gypsy waltz using non-traditional scale and irregular accents that we find in folk music. Here it is. Now it's going to move up to a higher register in just a moment. Here that comes. Now, a quite contrasting second theme makes its way into the movement. And here we have that Baroque technique of the large group against the smaller group. This contrasting theme is actually presented in a lovely solo string quartet. But we don't lose the large group. The large group is watching and is constantly echoing. So let's hear the entrance of that second contrasting theme. Here's the build up to it. Here it comes. And the music is moving forward, but then what happens is this forward movement is actually stopped. There's an intrusion of very loud, repeated notes coming forth in octaves. One commentator called it a stone wall. And what happens is it keeps interrupting, and eventually there develops a kind of struggle between the lighter divertimento ideas and the darker interrupting ones. So here it comes. Our soft solos, protesting. There's again. And the interruptions come closer together, and as I said, a struggle begins to develop until it's truly a kind of a menacing battle. So let's hear where the tutti keeps building this struggle up, piling up the sounds. Hardest part in the, shall we say, climax of the struggle is in the middle of the movement. But even when we begin to reprise ideas, we still have that intrusion coming back. It just keeps dogging us. Solos try to survive. Again, the loud and soft alternation between the intrusion and the plaintive solos continues and kind of dies away until at the very end we have the whole thing sort of collapsing. Let's hear the final movement moments. Kind of wistful. And the thing is, that struggle doesn't go away, because when we come to the second movement, as we'll see in a moment, it actually kind of intensifies. The slow movement is quite memorable, molto adagio. It begins with this brooding melody that employs both Baroque imitation, because the idea comes in one voice and other voices echo it. But what is quite modern about it is its use of chromaticism. That's a term that means that we're putting in notes that aren't in the regular major-minor scale, and what it causes the music to kind of slip and slide by half steps. And what Bartók does is the music begins to slowly rise in an almost torturous manner. So we have a bit of a brief introduction. So let's hear that. It sets this brooding mood, and now our torturous chromatic idea. cellos, the muted violins. It creates a kind of sense of foreboding, and very soon another theme appears, which is quite nostalgic and poignant and definitely influenced by Hungarian folk music. But very shortly in the middle, there appears this motif. It's really very menacing. It's quite loud and in your face with very strong rhythms. When it first is presented, it's very loud and then sort of drops back, but soon grows to great ferocious force. Here it is. Incessantly building. Here it is at a slightly higher register. And soon this struggle between the forceful, loud, larger group against the more vulnerable, soft soloists is developed. But it's relentless. It keeps building and building until we reach this horrific outburst. Menacing and threatening, and when we finally get to a return of the opening material, it seems quite chastened. It appears over these tremolos. First the tremolos. And here comes that opening chromatic, brooding idea. There's one more intrusion by the menace idea, and then the movement kind of again dies away. And you might think, is there no hope? Well, yes, there is hope, because in the third movement, what happens is Bartók actually turns away from the brooding and the struggle and gives us a very cheerful rondo that combines not only Baroque counterpoint and alternation of forces, but it uses a Hungarian folk dance melody, and it's presented with a flair for energy and fun. So here is our refrain for the rondo of the third movement, Allegro Assai. A very brief introduction before a soloist sings the rondo refrain. Now, A rondo is a dance, and it has a refrain that keeps coming back and again, with contrast material in between called episodes. We don't have time to listen to all the episodes, but I want you to hear this particular one, because remember how I told you Bartók likes fugues? What he does is he takes that refrain that we just heard and he builds a fugue on it where it comes in. Well, first you hear the subject in the full orchestra, and then the different voices, if you will, chasing each other with the fugue subject. So first the large group stating the first entrance, second, and he does another trick. He actually turns the subject upside down and makes another little fugue on it. But I want to move ahead to play this magical episode with the solo violin. The solo violin first enters with glistening tremolos in the violins in the back. Wanders off into a true cadenza. So this movement has it all, fun and games and graceful beauty, Hungarian folk songs, Baroque counterpoint, even a fugue. But what's really fun is the very end of the movement where the refrain comes back for a final time. And this time it's quite playful. What Bartók does is he actually uses pizzicato or pluck strings and presents the theme very playfully with pizzicato. Here it comes. There's also the slides, this. And now, get ready. A mad rush to the finish. Here it comes. Then a very sudden stop. Then the soloists kind of chasing each other. And then the surprise. And that's it. It's such a great piece. I hope you get a chance to listen to the whole thing. Thank you very much. My name is Rose Breckenridge.